Today we're going to be factoring by grouping. Factoring by grouping is pretty simple to recognize because you're going to see that you have 4 terms. Sometimes if you're taking a more advanced class, you're going to see 6 terms that you have to group. But basically to factor by grouping, you have to have an even amount of terms. In these 2 problems that you have on your screen, you have 1, 2, 3, 4 terms on the left problem, 1, 2, 3, 4 terms on the right problem. Let's start with the first one. The way we're going to factor by grouping is literally by grouping the first 2 together and the last 2 together. Then you want to find the GCF, the greatest common factor, from each group. In the first group, you're going to take out the A because they both have an A in common. From the second group, you're going to take out a B. They both have a B in common. So notice that once I factor those out, I am still left with a common factor. They both have x plus y in common. So what we're going to do is factor that out. We're going to write in one parenthesis x plus y, and in another parenthesis we're going to write exactly what we are left with. In this case, it's a plus b. If I were to distribute this so that I can see if I actually got the right answer, I have xa, or in math, we are going to write this as ax because we like to keep it in alphabetical order. So if I distribute again, I'm going to write plus bx plus ay plus by. And then notice I still don't have it exactly the same way it was in the beginning, but that's just because I have to rearrange the terms. So I'm going to write this now as ax, and I'm going to write ay next to it plus bx plus by, just so that it looks exactly like the first original problem. And I got exactly the same thing. So yes, I factored this correctly. Let's go on to the second problem. In the second problem, I have 4 terms, meaning that I can try to factor by grouping. I'm going to group the first 2 together and the last 2 together. From the first group, they both have an x in common. Factor it out. I'm left with y plus 2. Then plus, in the second one, I have 3 because they're both divisible by 3. That's my GCF. And I'm left with y plus 2 since 6 divided by 3 is 2. So once again, I have the same factor here for both of them. I'm going to factor it out. I'm going to take it out. And I'm going to be left with x plus 3, which goes in a second parenthesis. And that's my final answer. Directions, factor by grouping. Take a look at question number 1. We have 4 terms. I'm going to go ahead and group the first 2 together and the last 2 together. From the first 2, 40 and 24, both of those are divisible by 4, but we can go even bigger than that. They're both divisible by 8. So I'm going to go ahead and factor out the 8. They also both have x squared in common. So I'm going to factor out 8x squared. When I divide, 40 divided by 8 is 5. Since I had x cubed and I took x squared out, I'm left with 5x minus 24 divided by 8 is 3. And then, of course, the x squared factored out. So that's what I'm left with. And the second part, 15x minus 9, the GCF is 3 because they're both divisible by 3. So I'm left with 5x minus 3. 15 divided by 3 is 5. 9 divided by 3 is 3. So therefore, I'm left with 5x minus 3. Once I get to this answer, I'm feeling good about my answer because I can see that they both have 5x minus 3 in common. So I open up another parenthesis and I write ax squared plus 3. One of the things I want you to notice is that there is no plus that goes in the middle. These are 2 factors. They're being multiplied. So don't put a plus in the middle. It's just 2 parentheses. Also notice that in this parentheses, I can't keep going. There are times when the answer that you get there, it could be a difference of 2 squares, and so you can continue factoring, but in this case, we don't have to. Go ahead and pause the video, see if you can do number 2 by yourself. In number 2, I'm going to group the first 2 together and the last 2 together. From the first group, they both have an a in common. I'm going to factor out the a, and I'm left with 2a plus 5b. From the second group, they literally have nothing in common. The GCF in that case is 1. Because there's nothing else I can take out, it is very important for you to write plus 1 because 1 is the GCF. And now I'm going to write parentheses 2a plus 5b. Notice, what is it that they have in common now? They have 2a plus 5b in common. So then I'm left with a plus 1. And so that's my final answer. In question number 3, we have 4 terms, but this time I notice I have a negative 3x minus 4y. I'm going to group the first two, but when I group the last two, I'm going to actually include the negative, the minus, in that group. So from the first group that I have here, they both have an x in common. I'm going to factor it out, and I'm left with 3x plus 4y. In the second group, they're both negative, so what I'm going to do is divide both of them by -1. That's going to be the GCF that I'm going to take out. And then -3 divided by -1 is +3, so I'm going to write 3x. Then -4 divided by -1 is +4y. So again, great news. I see 3x plus 4y to the left of that minus that's separating the two parts. And then I have 3x plus 4y to the right. So I'm going to factor out 3x plus 4y. And I'm left with x minus 1. And that's my final answer. I'm going to skip number 4 for now because it is a little bit challenging. I want you to try number 5 and number 6 first, and then we're going to come back to number 4. In question number 5, we're going to go ahead and group the first two together and the last two together. So in the first group, they are both divisible by 6. So I'm going to factor out the 6. I'm left with x minus 7. Plus, from the second group, they both have a y in common. So I factor out the y, and I'm left with x minus 7. Once again, once I see this, I'm really happy because I know that I can just factor out the x minus 7 that they both have in common, and I'm left with 6 plus y, so I'm done with the problem. Go ahead and pause the video, do number 6, and then press play when you're done. In number 6, I'm going to group the first two and the last two. And remember, because the last one has that negative right here in front of the 3x, I went ahead and I included it in the group. From the first group, they are both divisible by 4 and they both have an x, so I factor it out. I'm left with x minus 2y. From the second group, they're both divisible by -3. I'm trying to get that x to stay positive in the group, so that's why I divide by -3. -3 divided by -3 is just +1, so I'm left with positive x. And then +6 divided by -3 is -2y. So once again, I have x minus 2y in common, and I'm left with 4x minus 3, and that's my final answer. We're coming back to number 4, which I had said is a little bit more challenging, and I'm going to show you exactly why. When I do the same thing I did before, which is group the first two and group the last two, including the minus because it is subtraction, you're going to see that from the first group, I can't factor anything out. So I told you when you can't factor anything out, factor out a 1. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. 3xy plus 2 stays in parentheses. From the second group, they're both divisible by -1. So I'm going to factor that out, and I'm left with 3x plus 2y because -2 divided by -1 is +2. Now we have a problem here because unlike all the other problems that we did, this one is 3xy plus 2 in the first parentheses, but in the second one, it's 3x plus 2y. They are not the same. They're not the same. Therefore, right now, we basically would be stuck and we would basically say, okay, I can't factor it. But before you give up, let's try something. Let's try rewriting the problem in a different order to see if possibly I can group it in a different way. So let's go ahead and write this down as 3xy. I'm going to move the -3x. I'm going to then write plus 2 and then minus 2y. So basically, I'm just moving this around. I'm moving it over. So that way, I have it in a bit of a different order to see if it could possibly work this way. So I'm going to go ahead and proceed as I did before. I'm going to group the first two and the last two. From the first two, I have 3x in common, and I'm left with y minus 1. From the second group, I have 2 in common. They're both divisible by 2, and I'm left with 1 minus y. Take a look at your screen. We are so close to getting this to something that we're going to factor. If you notice, in one part we have y minus 1, and in the other part we have 1 minus y. There is a property that says that y minus 1 is going to be the same as negative 1 minus y. Okay, because if you notice, if I distribute that minus, that makes the 1 negative, and it makes negative negative a positive y, which if I reorganize it and switch the order, I end up with the same thing, y minus 1. So why is that important? I'm going to now rewrite this as y minus 1, but in doing so, this sign has to switch. Because it is positive, I'm going to now make it negative 2, because the way this works is going to be a negative. So then I can bring down the rest, 3xy minus 1, and now I'm happy once again because they do match. So I can finish the problem. They both have y minus 1 in common, and then I'm left with 3x minus 2. So this would not have been possible had I not thought about rearranging the problem from the very beginning, and then without knowing that this is a property that I can follow when they look basically just exactly the same, but they are not in the right order. In other words, you just kind of have like a mirror image of them. Then the way you fix that is by factoring out a negative. And what that will do is switch this sign right here where it says plus to a minus. Hope you found this video helpful. Remember to subscribe to my channel for more help with math so that you can say, yes, I can do math with confidence. Until next time, thanks for watching.